There are a lot of problems with today's cities, and they'll take a lot of work to fix, though some of them will take more work than others. Faced with such a monumental task, I sometimes see people claiming we should just build new cities instead. But the truth is, it's still easier to improve existing cities than to create new ones from scratch. Because ultimately, the problems of urban planning aren't technological, architectural, or logistical, they're political. There are some times, though, when building new cities might be justified, especially when there's a shortage of housing or office space for a rapidly modernizing population, and that's exactly what happened in South Korea. Several shindoshi, literally translated as new towns, have been built over the past few decades. So while I was in Korea, I decided to visit a few of them. Actually visiting these places and experiencing them in person gave me a totally different understanding of what they're like compared to just reading about them. And I think they highlight some of the challenges of building completely new towns and cities. Because while some of these places are pretty great, there are others that probably sounded better on paper. I've been to South Korea many times before, but it was always for business travel, so I never had a chance to explore on my own. It was really nice to finally visit Korea for the first time without having to spend all day in meetings at Samsung. And no, I don't speak Korean. I spent my years of business traveling learning Mandarin Chinese and living in Taiwan instead. So I will almost certainly pronounce these town names incorrectly. If you have a problem with my Korean pronunciation, go watch something else. The first new town I wanted to visit was Songdo, a new, modern, green, low-carbon smart city built on reclaimed land in the Incheon Free Economic Zone. It's located about 30 kilometers southwest of Seoul near Incheon Airport, and about an hour away by public transit. Most of the buildings here are LEED certified, a sustainable building rating system, and a core goal of this new town was to promote green and low-carbon growth. I read that 40% of the space in Songdo was dedicated to parks and green space, and the whole town is made up of mixed-use neighborhoods connected by bicycle paths. That all sounds pretty grand, but my audience gave it mixed reviews, so I wanted to see it for myself. Most people told me to get out at Central Park Station, which I was told was the nicest part of Songdo, but I wanted to check out the International Business District first and then walk back towards the park. And that turned out to be a pretty bad idea because I got out of the metro station on a narrow sidewalk next to this wide road. This was unpleasant and not a great start to my visit here. The center of the road had this park area, but nobody was there because who the hell wants to hang out in the middle of a 6-lane road? As I waited to cross the road, cars were driving really fast here, and it was not comfortable at all. This part of Songdo has a lot of corporate offices, and it felt very corporate and sterile, but also surprisingly car-friendly. Some of the spaces between the office buildings were nice enough, and there were bike lanes on almost every street, even next to that wide road near the metro station. Though there was junk lying in several of them. And I have no idea why they installed a giant ball in the middle of this bike lane. I guess it's to keep cars from driving in it, but it seemed like a crash hazard for anybody cycling. This place was not so great, so I decided to walk towards the park. This is Central Park, and the idea was modeled after Central Park in New York. One giant park that cuts through the whole city. After a short walk through the park, I got to this little place with shops that was clearly designed to look like a Northern European city. I'm assuming Denmark was their model, based on the Danish names. This place was pretty kitschy, but lots of cities do this kind of thing. It was still way better than, say, Manchester Square in Edmonton, Canada, with shops designed to look like beautiful Dutch canal houses, which surround a giant parking lot at the side of a busy Strode. Someday, I'm going to have to make a video about cargo cult urbanism. At least here in Songdo, this place was pedestrianized and at the side of a park. I walked through the park and it was pretty nice. I saw several other people out for a walk and a few people cycling, and a lot of bicycles parked here as well. The park goes under a bridge, so I didn't need to cross this busy road at street level. and I was able to easily walk through the park and farther into the city. I can understand why most people told me to go to this metro station first. But unfortunately, that was about it for the nice parts. Everything else I saw in Songdo was pretty terrible. The residential buildings felt like gated communities that were meant to be driven into. This place looked like it was supposed to be a pedestrian path connecting between buildings, but it was closed, and there was a security guard making sure nobody walked through. I saw a few open areas with public art, and these buildings at least had a playground next to them, but it was right next to this wide road. But then everywhere I went in Songdo, I saw extremely wide roads, and there were a lot of traffic lights to wait at. I saw several roads with bicycle paths, but not a lot of people cycling. There were a lot of bicycles parked at the metro station though, so it's possible that these are more often used during rush hour. But everything about this city makes it clear that it was designed for drivers and everybody else comes a very, very, very distant second. So I don't blame people for not wanting to cycle here. Like, why would you bother when it will always be faster to drive? And what's the point in having an ultra-modern green smart eco city if every time you walk somewhere you have to spend several minutes waiting to cross a 6-lane road while staring at a Volvo dealership? This hotel was the first LEED certified hotel in all of South Korea. Congratulations, Sheridan. Your eco-friendly certified building is right on the side of this awful 8-lane arterial road full of cars. Seriously, look at how horrible this place is in this eco-friendly green smart city. What a f***ing joke. One of the fundamental problems with creating a new city from scratch is how to finance its construction. Previous new towns in Korea were planned and financed directly by the government, but these days the favored method of financing almost every large infrastructure project anywhere is public-private partnerships, where governments give up control and profits to private corporations, but in return they get private financing that doesn't need to come out of taxes. This may seem great in principle, but while the eco-friendly smart city may be a great marketing pitch, the ultimate goal is to make a profit. So these private companies are generally not willing to take on the risk of building something totally new, which usually means sticking to the car-centric status quo, especially when the largest private company involved in the project is an American developer. And the executives at those corporations who sign off on the financing and the project plans themselves are extremely wealthy, and they're the type of people who drive everywhere. In short, they're unlikely to greenlight any project that isn't accessible by Lamborghini. So while Songdo isn't exactly a walkable, eco-friendly utopia, it is a great place to watch supercars line up at the gas station. Ultimately though, Songdo wasn't so much built as a place for people to live, but rather as a development in the Incheon Free Economic Zone that would attract foreign companies and international investment. And to do that, they just needed a city that looked great in renders and drone flyovers, which is why the farther up you are, the nicer this city looks. After walking around Songdo for about 2 hours, I was completely sick of this place and wanted to get to a metro station. But instead of walking along the back fence of this office building next to 6 lanes of car traffic, I decided to go along some smaller streets. So I walked along this pedestrian path that brought me into an office park. And there were parked cars everywhere. Seriously, there were cars in every direction as far as I could see. There were parking lots full of cars, cars on the street, cars on the sidewalk. If there was a space for a car, there was one parked there. It is so gross that Songdo was pitched as this futuristic green LEED certified smart city, and yet they built it to be so car-friendly that everybody drives everywhere. And when I finally got to the metro station, it was at the side of a massive 8-lane road, because of course it was. While I was on the metro, I was genuinely considering scrapping the idea for this video altogether. Songdo was the most recent of my new towns on my list. In fact, it's still under construction. It was supposed to be the one that had learned all the lessons from all the towns that came before it, to build the ultimate modern city. So surely the others would be even worse. But I decided that since I had already traveled this far, I might as well visit Sanbon on my way back to Seoul. As soon as I got to the metro station in Sanbon, it already felt so much better than Songdo. There were lots of people around, and the metro stations had several shops with small businesses. I followed the signs toward the city center exit and came across this bridge, which let me avoid crossing a busy road, which was already half the size of any of the arterial roads I had to cross in Songdo. After coming down the ramp from the bridge, I had to cross this one small street, and it was immediately obvious that this was a place where people come first, not cars. Notice that they don't need any traffic lights here. The street is narrow and low speed, so people can just cross at the zebra crossing. And it's the drivers that have to wait for the people walking and not the other way around. But after crossing that one tiny street, I was in this pedestrian area with dozens of interesting shops and restaurants. This place immediately felt so much more alive than anywhere I went in Songdo. Needless to say, there were hundreds of people out because this is an enjoyable place to be. And after being in Songdo, it was nice to walk around without the constant sound of car traffic. But look at all these ridiculous buildings. They're probably not even LEED certified. I crossed a few streets in the area, but traffic was very light, mostly just trucks making deliveries to the shops. And these streets even had raised crossings with this ramp, similar to the continuous sidewalks in the Netherlands. These are great because drivers are forced to slow down, which means they can't drive dangerously fast through the zebra crossing. These should be absolutely everywhere because when it comes to slowing down drivers, physics always works better than signs. Unfortunately, apart from the side facing the train station, this low-car shopping area was surrounded by some pretty wide roads on every side, and the nearby city hall had this huge surface parking lot out front. The other streets in the area were not car-free, and they were typical of the narrow streets found in many other cities in South Korea. The residential areas also had relatively narrow streets, and there were speed bumps to slow down drivers. And since this town was one of the first new towns built in the 90s, there's been enough time for the trees to grow in too, which is nice. Since the streets are relatively narrow and car traffic is slow, there are no traffic lights here, so I never had to wait to cross the street. There was a lot of surface parking for cars between the buildings, which maybe wasn't so nice to look at, but there were also a lot of trees and several playgrounds, and I saw lots of places with bicycle parking as well. This isn't my favorite type of residential development. I much prefer the mid-rise and row home neighborhoods in the Netherlands, but after walking through the sterile, car-infested roads of Songdo, this place was like paradise. One of the key design decisions made when designing Sanbon was that residential development should be connected together by car-free paths, making it easy to get from building to building without interacting with cars. And these were definitely the best part of this neighborhood. This path between buildings was lined with dozens of small tents with shops, like a farmer's market. It was very nice. This really shows how the right kind of development allows for so much more human interaction and community building that would not be possible in a place full of wide roads and cars. And all of this was directly across the street from the entrance to the other side of the metro station. On this side, there's a small car-free square that connects directly to several of the adjacent apartment buildings. And there's another bridge that takes you over the road and into the station. Sanbon is generally considered to be a successful new town, but it was mostly designed as a residential area to ease the housing crisis in Seoul during the 1990s. Most people who live here still need to commute to another city for work, so later new towns were built to also incorporate office space as well. Which brings us to Pangyo, a new town built in the early 2000s as a high-tech hub. This city has been connected to Seoul via 2 metro lines for several years, but last year a new express train station on the GTX-A line was opened nearby. The GTX is a high-speed commuter train built entirely underground and designed to significantly reduce travel times to and from Seoul and several satellite cities. So I decided to take the GTX out to Pangyo. It's so weird to be on a train going 180 kilometers per hour without being able to see anything outside for the entire ride. As I was coming up the escalator from the GTX station, I knew my first impressions of Pangyo would be good, when the first thing I saw was kids cycling through a park. I am a firm believer that exits from any train or metro station should be in a pedestrianized area whenever possible, and this is a great example of that done well. They also connected this linear park and metro entrance to several adjacent residential buildings, which provides these people with an excellent way to get around without having to worry about cars. And I don't know what this was all about, but it's coming right for us! The park crosses this small street, and I was glad to see that they've installed raised crossings here too. No traffic lights required. This park design was interesting. It was well integrated into the surrounding residential buildings, and every part I walked through was different. At this point, the park crosses a much busier road, and there was a pedestrian bridge to cross it. Now, I don't really like pedestrian bridges, and I've talked about that before in previous videos. I believe that the people walking should stay on the ground, and it's the cars that should go up or down. Also, it's pretty comical that this giant road with a highway-like design has a speed limit of 30 kilometers per hour, but I've talked about that before too. But walking through this park was nice, and after another pedestrian bridge over another terrible road, I got to the Pangyo Station Plaza. This is a mixed office and retail plaza on top of the main metro station for Pangyo. This felt very corporate, because it is, but it didn't feel nearly as soulless as Songdo. I mean, if we have to be controlled by our corporate overlords, the least they can do is let us get to the metro station without crossing a 6-lane road. There were also a ridiculous number of street preachers from the World Mission Society Church of God, and I'm sorry to say, you're not getting out of this plaza without talking to at least one of them. Unfortunately, this car-free plaza, while pleasant, is surrounded on every side by wide roads. However, one of the design goals of Pangyo was to have low-car streets and walkways in between the wide arterial roads. So while cars are definitely prioritized here, and it can take too long to cross the road, it is at least possible to get away from the cars on occasion. The bicycle infrastructure was laughable, though. There were a handful of bicycle lanes like this one along the sidewalk, which looks pretty good, until you notice that it just ends at the entrance to a parking garage. And this bus lane has become the de facto entrance to that parking garage. Seriously. These drivers have already been given 3 lanes per direction, and they still block the damn bus lane. It really doesn't matter how much space you devote to cars, they will always take more. But the reason I was waiting for the bus was because I was going to Bundang, which is one of the original new towns built in the 1990s. Taking the bus here is an exercise in patience, though. I was sitting on a bus full of people that was stuck behind the traffic of less than half as many people driving cars. And when I got to my destination, the bus couldn't even pull into the bus stop because there was a car illegally parked there, because of course there was. I came to this area because I heard there was this nice tree-lined street full of cafes, and it was lovely. But it was also totally chock full of cars. It was wild. This is a textbook example of how cars ruin great urban places. This street is lovely with trees that provide shade and lots of cool cafes, but that is soured by the constant sound of engines and the stink of idling cars. I did not like this street at all, so I started to walk to the metro station that would take me to Bundang Central Park. Thankfully, Bundang was also built with the philosophy that there should be pedestrianized streets parallel to car streets, which are much nicer, and I walked most of the way to the metro station along this street. After taking the metro a few stops, I exited right onto this pedestrian street. This is what that cafe street should look like. I walked along this pedestrianized corridor towards the park, but unfortunately, in order to get to the park itself, I had to wait a surprisingly long time to cross this wide arterial road. I waited at least 6 minutes, and the light was already red when I got there, so I have no idea how long this light is, but I can tell you it is way too long. The park itself was pretty nice, though it was impossible to escape the constant sound of distant car traffic, because the park is surrounded by wide roads on every side, and this one that runs right through the middle of it, though thankfully there was this underpass to avoid that one. It seems like such a waste that all of these apartment buildings were built around this beautiful central park, but then all the residents need to cross 8 lanes of car traffic to get to it. Though if you look carefully in the distance, you can see one pedestrian bridge, so that's something, I guess. I think this sums up both Bundang and Pangyo pretty well. These are places designed primarily for cars, with a few small sections carved out for people. I hiked up these stairs to get to the metro station, which was attached to this mall, and had a surprisingly large number of bicycles parked out front. The mall itself was really busy. I guess this is where everyone hangs out to get away from all the traffic. So far, my experiences in these new towns were pretty mixed, but there was one last city I needed to visit, which was Dongtan, a new town built in the early 2000s around the same time as Pangyo. This town is at the very end of the new GTX-A line. This new train has cut commute times to Seoul in half, and there has been a renewed interest in developments in Dongtan as a result. The GTX trains are really fast, but that comes at a cost of the stations being very far underground. So I needed to take 5 escalators to get to the surface. And when I got out, it was this. Pretty desolate. Now, I'm not going to criticize this too much because the GTX line only just recently opened, and I'm generally in favor of building transit first so that when people move into their new homes, they already have high-quality transit nearby. Maybe they'll build a beautiful pedestrianized area here with connections to the surrounding apartment buildings. We can only hope. What this did confirm to me, though, is that I got out at the wrong exit. And since the station isn't fully opened yet, I had to take 4 escalators back down so that I could cross to the other side, which was clearly a much nicer part of the station and where I probably should have come out in the first place. This exit was connected by escalator to a shopping mall, and while not exactly as cool as a pedestrianized square, it's still better than being dumped out at the side of an arterial road. But of course, once I walked through the shopping mall and managed to get outside, there it is. There's the 10 lanes of car traffic. I wanted to get to this park right near the shopping mall, but there's no way to cross the street here because there's a fence. So I went to the nearest crossing, waited to cross, and walked to the park, which turned out not to be a park, but a parking lot. Sometimes these scripts just write themselves. But I did eventually get to the park, and it was very nice. And as you probably guessed by now, the idea of a central park with buildings around it is a signature design feature of most Korean new towns. And in this case, the whole park wasn't completely surrounded by arterial roads, which was nice. Though even this tiny 30km/h street still had a traffic light for people to cross. On the other side of the park, I found this small bridge that connected directly to the residential buildings. The building development still felt a little like gated communities, but much less so than Songdo because there were actually paths to connect between residential developments. And I didn't feel like I was trespassing while walking through. The road design really ruins this place, though. Anytime I wanted to walk somewhere, I had to wait to cross several roads, and in some cases, there wasn't even any traffic, which just meant I had to wait at red lights while absolutely no cars were going through. This residential street has a 30km/h speed limit, but it's still extremely wide and straight. And the sidewalk has been fenced off with signs that say, Child Protection Zone. I guess they've accepted that cars kill kids, but since they won't restrict the cars, they have to fence off the kids. Which is kind of depressing. The sidewalks were fairly large though, and I saw a few roads with protected bicycle lanes. But again, it's very clear that this place was designed for drivers, with a few elements here and there to placate everyone else. I personally believe that residential areas should be designed in a way that ensures that children can get around independently without needing to be shuttled around in a car by their parents, but this place is not that. After returning from my trip to South Korea, I visited a new town in the Netherlands that was built in the 1980s. This town was designed to put walking and cycling first instead of cars, and it couldn't be more different. Especially the ability for children to travel independently, but that's a topic for a future video. There was another park and residential area that I had planned to explore, but I was so tired of walking next to giant roads and breathing polluted air that I decided to go back to Seoul instead. It's really disappointing to me that a phenomenally great high-speed underground commuter rail line has been built to a place like this that is so car-centric. It's such a wasted opportunity to make people cross 10 lanes of car traffic just to get to the train station. So, what have we learned here? Well, the most obvious thing is that building a new city from scratch is a lot easier said than done. There are still going to be competing financial and political pressures, as well as the problems of excessive traffic engineering. And as usual, if a place is designed for cars first and everything else a distant second, it's always going to feel like a place that's not designed for humans. But I saw some good places too, and maybe we can learn something from that. And hopefully it provided you with some entertainment as well. But ultimately, it was still better than all-day meetings with Samsung. Speaking of Samsung, their main campus is called Samsung Digital City, and it's like a new town dedicated only to Samsung. I've been there many times before, but security is very strict. I made a video about Samsung Digital City, but since I wasn't allowed to film inside, I had to use whatever clips I could find, and while I believe this constitutes fair use, the automated YouTube copyright detection bot disagrees, so that video will only be available on Nebula. I'll put a link in the description. And if you want to support this channel and the work I do, the best way to do that is by signing up to Nebula. I would not be able to afford to make the videos that I do, especially videos like this one that require travel, if it wasn't for the support that I get from Nebula. I have a Patreon page as well, and if you prefer Patreon, that's great. But I generally try to promote Nebula simply because I think it's a better deal for my viewers. Because when you sign up to Nebula, you support this channel, but you also get access to the videos of over 200 other talented creators, all without any ads or sponsorships. Nebula is a creator-owned streaming service. It's not owned by venture capital firms, media conglomerates, or big tech. And it's not beholden to the whims of advertisers either. Which is why Nebula can afford to support creators properly and provide a platform for them to make the videos they want to make without worrying about demonetization or algorithmic optimization. So if you'd like to support this channel, help make a creator-owned streaming service successful, and get access to some great videos in the process, then I'd encourage you to try Nebula. If you sign up at the link go.nebula.tv/notjustbikes, you'll get 40% off an annual subscription, so you pay just $36 per year, and some of that goes to supporting this channel. Nebula also has gift cards, and my Dutch viewers will be glad to know that you can buy them with Ideal. You can even send one to yourself if you just want to sign up for Nebula using Ideal instead of a credit card. I'll leave a link down below. Thanks to everyone who supports this channel on Nebula or on Patreon, or even just by watching this video on YouTube all the way through to the end. I appreciate it.